There are many franchises that we all treasure from our childhoods. We have Disney animation, Disney live action, superheroes, action heroes, Cartoon Network, Boomerang, Toonami, Nickelodeon, Disney Channel, more superheroes, Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, and somewhere in that mix, we also had Shrek. I remember it as if it were yesterday. I had just turned 6 and my dad took me to see the movie in theaters. I loved it so much and it only got better with time. Before it got worse. But it was Shrek 2 that introduced us to a side character that was so well received that DreamWorks decided to give him his own spin-off. And after a measly 11 years later, DreamWorks decided to go back to the well and see if this franchise had any gas left in the tank. And boy did it.
A hit. A fine hit.
As not only did Puss in Boots 2 perform very well, but it managed to hold its own at the box office against Avatar: The Way of Water.
Holy shit, dude.
And did you know that for all its praise, Puss in Boots 2 actually copied the whole structure of the first movie? And that's just scratching the surface. It also copied the structure for the story, villains, side characters, and even Puss's journey. But the question you're all asking is, how does it compare to the first movie? Well, strap in because we're about to find out. Let the battle commence. I was surprised at how similar the stories for these movies were. Both films start with Puss in Boots and his wacky shenanigans. He then goes to a bar to get some milk when all of a sudden, trouble comes his way after he's presented with his wanted poster. The only difference being that in the first movie, he gets the upper hand and scares the bandits, whereas in the second movie, the bandit gets the upper hand and scares Puss. I actually thought that this was a decent reversal of the film's openings, and it lays out a path for the rest of the movie. But the comparisons don't stop there. In the first film, he is on a quest to find magic beans, whereas in the second film, he is on a quest to find a magic wish. And in order to do that, in both movies, he has to make a stop to our secondary villain of the film. In the first movie, it's Jack and Jill, and in the second, it's Jack Horner. And wouldn't you believe it, Kitty happens to be there to steal the exact same thing at the exact same time. And then we have our three characters embark on a journey together to find the magic item. Well, I'll be. Would you look at that? The second movie took a lot of inspiration from the first film, and honestly, it did it better. Something you'll notice is that in the first film, Puss is going on the journey to get rich and pay off his debts.
The only wish I have is to repay an old debt. And this is my chance.
But in the second film, he is literally doing it to survive against death.
I'm death. Straight up. And I've come for you, Puss in Boots.
One is clearly more high stakes than the other, and that's what is so great about Puss in Boots 2. It hooks you with a very urgent story and a terrifying threat. You are so on board with Puss and want to see him succeed in this journey, as the big bad wolf is so freaking terrifying. In the first movie, you are just going off a very basic motivation, which is fine, I guess, but there's no personal or emotional stakes to this story, other than Puss paying off some debts to characters that we have never seen before, and that he has proven he can easily escape. But escaping death? He can try, but he's like the creature from It Follows. He will never stop and never sleep until he finds his mark. So Puss's story here easily beats the story for Puss in Boots 1. In the first movie, the story feels like a generic spin-off story that they came up with in 2 minutes, whereas Puss in Boots 2 is the opposite. You can tell a lot of time was put into developing this story, and it's a night and day improvement over the story for the first film. Not to mention, the pacing is non-stop in the second film, and it's just pretty bland in the first film.
All I smell is bullshit.
The first movie even has some moments that just completely stop the movie so it can purely cater towards very little kids. And that is something that the Shrek movies never did. Shrek was known for servicing both audiences. Kids would have fun, which made them happy, and the jokes that went completely over their heads made the adults happy. But Puss in Boots 1 is the first film in the franchise that broke away from that tradition. Now, to be fair, Puss in Boots 2 did it as well in one scene, but it was over very quick and then it got back to the plot. And it even amounted to something when this happened. So the movie with a superior story is Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. The first Puss in Boots mainly consists of our trio, and in the second movie, we have our trio plus Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Now in the first movie, we are introduced to Kitty Softpaws, who is voiced by Salma Hayek. Now her casting is kind of an in-joke, as both Banderas and Hayek have acted opposite each other in live action in Desperado, Once Upon a Time in Mexico, and Spy Kids 3D. So putting them together with a similar dynamic is actually really clever. I mean, the two are even very much like this in real life.
You hit me in the head with a guitar?
You're a woman?
Oh. Didn't you train with the Spanish Olympic team?
I did for 4 months. I trained with the Spanish Olympic. It's true.
He's
Why did you do that?
Because it's,
She's doing that the whole entire day in the
it's
interviews.
so
She just
annoying.
fights
He
me
has to
all
be
the
so
time.
good at
You have to
everything.
always say
Yes,
the last
I-
word. All the time.
Graham, Mummy and Daddy are fighting. I don't like it.
Oh my God.
Unfortunately, there is not much to their development in the first film. The two at first don't like each other, but then of course they start to develop a bond and become love interests, only for her to betray his trust then win it back. It's pretty generic stuff when you get down to it. And then we have
Humpty Alexander Dumpty.
We'll talk more about him in the villain segment, but he is a third wheel. Him and Puss used to be old friends, and he is now leading the trio on a journey, all the whilst he has something sinister planned that he is hiding from Puss. And the big twist of the movie is that he was the villain all along. And as for the characters in Puss in Boots 2, Kitty reprises her role, and it seems that quite a lot actually happened between her and Puss after the first movie. The two were actually going to get married, but then Puss pussed out on their wedding day. This leads to tensions between the two, which again is pretty generic stuff, but the movie actually does something so smart that it makes this generic quarrel much more interesting, purely based on the fact that Puss is being chased by death. He very much could die any day now, and much like anyone in that position, it forces him to reevaluate his life choices, and leaving Kitty at the altar is on top of that list. So again, this just shows how ingenious Puss's journey is in this movie, that it makes a super generic lovers quarrel actually interesting to watch. And even Kitty as a character is more enjoyable in this movie. The way she is written and interacts with not just Puss, but also with the dog, it just makes us a more tight-knit group of friends. Speaking of which, it's time to talk about Burrito. Now when this character first came on screen, I immediately thought I was going to hate him, because he has all the makings of an annoying animated character. He has a high-pitched voice, he's super excited about everything, states the obvious, and he seems like a shallow and naive character that is there for the kids to laugh at. But the more the movie goes on, you realize that this character is actually really sad. He has such a tragic backstory, and he doesn't even realize it. Even Kitty and Puss are both disturbed by it. And this is so hilariously dark, but also genuinely sad. This is a poor soul who got abandoned and is too optimistic to realize it. And he didn't deserve the poor treatment that he got. Humpty Dumpty, on the other hand, deserved everything he got, but we'll talk more about him later. But yes, our main trio of characters were far superior in Puss in Boots 2. But what about the rest of the characters? Well, in the first movie, there are other characters in the film, but they are so in the background and lack any kind of focus that they just come across as extras. Puss's mother, the townspeople, they leave such little impact that I completely forgot about them for all these years. Meanwhile, in Puss in Boots 2, the rest of the characters do have a ton of focus, specifically Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And yeah, it is kind of weird to see the Three Bears go from this
character's so small
to this.
Throwing a dozen points.
Eh? Ooh, have you got any savoury pies?
Yeah, what flavours you got?
Now, I didn't like the voice for Junior. I honestly thought it was James Corden voicing him. And it turns out it isn't. It's this fella.
Black fella did it.
Hey, there's Violet! Ah! Was it Violet? It's Violet, right? Hazel and Violet. There we go. Oi, you criming us when we just crimed you? No crime backs. Oh, she's not my sister. She's a fugitive orphan.
Yeah, uncanny, isn't it? Maybe they didn't want to pay for another known celebrity, so they got someone who sounds like him. But that voice just doesn't fit to me. Aside from that, I loved what this movie did with these characters. There have been various different takes on Goldilocks and the Three Bears, but usually Goldilocks runs out of their house and escapes. Or in The Simpsons case,
Oh, that bed was just right.
thankfully in Puss in Boots 2, we don't get that. On the contrary, this is a brand new take where the bears take her in as one of their own, and they become a family. In spite of that though, Goldilocks wants to get her biological family back, and that's why she is embarking on this wish-fulfilling journey, and it's a genuinely good motivation. And I wonder, with all this talk about representation, I wonder if any orphans out there who were adopted into a good family were moved by this. So yeah, not only do we get more characters in Puss in Boots 2, but they are far more interesting, have much more in-depth character arcs, and a story that utilizes and involves all of them. So the movie with the far superior characters is Puss in Boots 2: The Last Wish. There are two sets of villains in these movies. In the first film, we have Jack and Jill and Humpty Dumpty, and in the second movie, we have Jack Horner and the Big Bad Wolf. Jack and Jill being called murderous outlaws was so hilarious to me, and the movie wastes no time in proving that. So Jack and Jill had a couple of good scenes, and that's about it. You think they're gonna be these big villains, but after all that great build-up, they ended up being henchmen, decided to go rogue, which lasted about 2 seconds, then ended up in the hospital during the credits, and I just came away thinking that they were both completely wasted in this movie. Now thankfully, the same cannot be said for the secondary villain in the second film. As I said, Jack Horner has very much the same role as Jack and Jill, except the second movie gives him tons of screen time. He was a constant laugh in this movie. On paper, he is a generic bad guy who is so over the top evil, but what they do with it by including Jiminy Cricket as his conscience was just so ingenious and provided non-stop laughs. The movie is fully aware that he is a generic over-the-top villain and they take full advantage of it. And to my surprise, the joke never got old and I laughed so hard every time they played into it. So as a secondary villain, he is expertly incorporated into the movie, and whereas I completely forgot that Jack and Jill were in the first film, I will never forget that Jack Horner was in the second. And then we have our main villains. Now Humpty Dumpty being the villain was the funniest joke in this entire movie. It's just so damn funny that Humpty Dumpty would be a villain in this world. And the reveal of his disguises throughout the film was so good, especially when you see him in the cat costume, and the scene plays it so straight. That being said, there are so many problems with him. First off, I was honestly bored with the long flashback of Puss and Humpty. I mean, it had its moments, but it felt drawn out and uninteresting. Although I will admit, what Humpty did to portray Puss was such a bastard move. He tries to play the victim and justify it by saying we're best friends, but he knew what he was doing. Watching the movie now, I was surprised that Puss even forgave Humpty Dumpty, because what he did is just a complete betrayal. There are levels to how someone you know can screw up, and personally, if someone did me wrong like that, I would never forgive that person again, because you can't trust that person. And for Puss to forgive him and say,
It is good to have my brother back.
I just didn't buy it, and I thought this was very poorly written. Now, what did Humpty Dumpty do? Well, he tricked Puss, who had just redeemed himself to the village, into being the getaway driver for his robbery, and then when they crash and get caught, Puss rightfully runs away and leaves Humpty to get arrested. And Humpty Dumpty says that Puss stabbed him in the back by leaving him, even though the only person who got stabbed in the back that night was Puss. The town loved Puss, and Humpty got jealous and turned the whole town against him. That's it. Case closed. Puss didn't betray him. Humpty Dumpty is the one who did the betraying, and I really didn't buy his sob story. And the whole storyline of Puss being the one the village blamed for this was just ridiculous, especially with Humpty Dumpty there pointing the finger. Not only did that part not make sense, but it makes you hate this village, and having him turn good in the end with some of the most abrupt and contrived writing I have seen really rubbed me the wrong way. They go to these extreme lengths to make him do something so heartless that this last-minute redemption felt so out of place. They should have just let him stay a villain and have Puss point out his blatant hypocrisy. He says he didn't fit in this town, but then why rob a bank? That just shows that he was a thief from the very beginning. He blames Puss, but the only person at fault here is himself. But no one tells him that, and that's what was so infuriating. Basically, this movie did a very poor job at making me feel any sympathy for this character. I thought he was a rotten, dirty egg from the very beginning, and the way he sacrifices himself in the end, there was zero impact. Even Puss didn't act like it was a big deal. So although I think they had something good going with this character, they went in the complete wrong direction by not holding him to account for his own actions, as well as his half-assed redemption arc. So I liked Humpty Dumpty when the movie allowed him to be the villain, but his misguided motivation did not tie in with his redemption arc. And if I'm being honest,
What is that?
he has nothing on the Big Bad Wolf, aka Death.
You are no bounty hunter. You are
Death.
This is a PG movie, and he feels like he came right out of a hard PG-13. He is so intimidating that it brings out a side of Puss that we have never seen before. He is terrified. That wolf put Puss in his place before things even got started.
Fear me if you dare.
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
The Big Bad Wolf is such a fantastic villain. He turns Puss, this overconfident and wisecracking cowboy, into a little girl that runs away like he's being chased by a slasher villain from a horror film. He always enters the scene with a smile, that incredibly confident and disturbingly joyous smile. And he approaches Puss very slowly like a slasher villain. But then in a split second, he can run way faster than Puss ever has. And he is the first character to actually draw blood in these movies. Jeez, he really makes a solid statement every time he enters a scene, and you are so scared for Puss whenever he reappears. Heck, at one point, he even gives Puss a panic attack. Seriously, this thing would even make Dragon retreat like a bitch. Every aspect of this character is amazingly done, and his design is really fantastic. Wagner Moura does the voice, and it is pitch perfect. The only thing I didn't like is that he has quite the Spanish vocabulary and accent. What I like about Death in this movie—
And I don't mean it metaphorically or rhetorically.
Yeah, we covered that. What I liked about him is that he stands out from every other character so monumentally, like he's from another dimension or another world. But on the odd occasion when he would say something like,
You're not living up to the legend. Gato. Corre, corre, gatito.
I've enjoyed the chase, Gato.
it did make me think, wait, what? Now you're talking like all the other characters. I mean, I never knew Death had an ethnicity.
And I don't mean it metaphorically or rhetorically.
We get it. I mean, it's not a huge deal, but I did think the accent brought him down a level from feeling as otherworldly as he did. I mean, if they wanted to do it, they could, but maybe have that accent and vernacular be there as a way of him intentionally mocking Puss? Just another way to get under his skin? But yeah, that was the only thing I wish they would have changed with this character. The best compliment I can give this villain is that there are some people I've talked to that didn't like this movie, but even they thought that The Big Bad Wolf was really good. So, what else can I say? It's no competition. The movie that by far has the superior villains is Puss in Boots 2: The Last Wish. After all these years, the action sequences are another thing I have forgotten about with the first Puss in Boots. In fact, even after re-watching the movie for this Versus video, I still completely forgot about them. So I had to watch them again in order to write this comparison. I think that sums it up right there. I thought the dance-off was very kiddie. The sword fighting part I really enjoyed. I thought they should have made that the whole scene instead of the silly dance-off. Also, they had the fairy tale beanstalk in this movie, and we got no giant. What a wasted opportunity that was. The action scenes aren't bad, but they are very disposable and leave such little impact. The action in the second movie, however, is very memorable. It has so much personality with all of these different characters in the battle arena, with Jack Horner accidentally murdering his own people, and with this.
Jerry, no!
Yeah, the action scenes are surprisingly dark, and people have these awful deaths and are begging for their lives. They really do push the PG rating with this movie. And the action sequences with the Big Bad Wolf were taken to the next level. These were so fast paced, and you were really scared for Puss. The tension is really amped up to a whole other level during these parts. And that's not even the craziest action scene this movie has. At the beginning of the movie, Puss fights a giant. I don't even know how this giant exists or what it is exactly, but it's a big epic action sequence that is being played off to a musical number and then ends with Puss dying. Yeah, Puss in Boots 2 is absolutely full to the rim with action, and it is so fun and filled with such a huge variety. So the movie with superior action is Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. At first glance, we all thought that Puss in Boots 2 was just gonna be another throwaway spin-off movie, but it ended up being so good that it can actually sit side by side with the good Shrek films. It was full of creativity, the story was incredibly smart, the action was so fun, the villain was amazing, the characters were very well developed, and it actually gave me one of the best fantastical journeys I've seen in a long time. And even the twisted spin on the beloved fairy tale creatures that the Shrek franchise is renowned for was done so well here too. It managed to make them hilarious and also horrifying as well. The Big Bad Wolf being death, that was such an ingenious idea. Just so long as you forget they already did the Big Bad Wolf.
Huh? What?
And killed Mother Bear. Good thing I didn't mention it. Puss in Boots 1, however, when the movie was over, I thought one thing. Why does this exist? I mean, there are a few funny gags here and there, but ultimately, what was the point of this movie? I liked it better now than I did back when it came out, but there was no real story here. Puss is given a boring origin story that we could have done without, and every decision that this movie made to kill off characters ends up being undone in the credits. So this movie actually undoes what little it did try to do, and it made the movie feel even more pointless and incredibly safe. You know what? I wonder. Let me look into who directed this movie. This movie was directed by Chris Miller, and the movie he directed before Puss in Boots was the worst Shrek film. It's all starting to make sense now. Now, I think this is an improvement over Shrek the Third, but it still comes across as incredibly disposable. The only thing I think this movie contributed was the introduction of Kitty Softpaws, who returned in Puss in Boots 2. Aside from that, this movie can fade into obscurity, and I really couldn't care less. Puss in Boots 2, on the other hand, it is shocking how much of an improvement this movie is to the first one. Puss actually goes through an arc, all the characters that are introduced are interesting, funny, and have tragic backstories of their own, and even returning characters are given more to do. And it has villains that it doesn't give convenient and forced redemptions to. It fully embraces their villainy, and is both hilarious and terrifying. It's time for the scores. Puss in Boots 1 gets a very average 5 out of 10, and Puss in Boots 2, The Last Wish, gets a 9. The first Puss in Boots is exactly what you would expect from a spin-off movie. It felt very generic and dull. The only thing you can say about it, aside from it exists, is... I guess there's nothing else you can say about it. It exists. It felt like it was purely made so it could milk money from the franchise. Puss in Boots 2 The Last Wish is the complete opposite of that. It was inspired, full of creativity in every single frame, and is just begging for a sequel. It was the best movie of the year when it came out, and because of its great reception, we are getting Shrek 5. And if it is half as inspired as this, then I cannot wait to see where it takes this franchise going forward. If you enjoyed this Versus video and like what I do, please do consider supporting me over on Patreon. Even a $1 donation will help keep the lights on, and you will get a ton of additional content in return. And a big thanks to all of my patrons who are supporting me. Now tell me, what do you think of the two Puss in Boots movies, and which one do you prefer and why? And don't worry, if you prefer the first movie, we'll still be friends. I don't know for how long, but we'll try to make it work. Anyway, sound off in the comments below, be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already so you can stay up to date with all my future videos, including my Snow White Versus video with the original animated movie and the new live-action remake. Thank you very much for watching everyone, and I will catch all of you very soon. Take care.